As you heard Newt Gingrich mention in his Florida speech earlier this week, the new Obama administration regulations mandating contraceptive and abortifacient coverage in health plans have raised new concerns about religious liberty. My first guest represents the 1st District of Kansas in the United States House of Representatives. He recently introduced a bill in the House aimed at protecting conscience rights of military chaplains. To discuss that and much more, we welcome Congressman Huelskamp to the program. Congressman, thanks for being here.
You bet.
Let's talk for a moment about these HHS regulations. Kathleen Sebelius comes out. She says anyone who provides health benefits to their employees, they must provide contraceptives and abortifacients and sterilizations, including religious organizations. What is motivating this?
Well, I think in this administration and other parts of secular society, there is this attack on faith. In this particular attack, it's an attack on Catholic religion, very specifically going after things that we find reprehensible and mandating that coverage. I think the impacts are going to be felt far and wide because the Catholic Church has provided much health care in this country, many schools and education in this country, and this would require us to choose between providing help for the poor and mandates from the government.
But the bishops thought they were going to get an exemption. They petitioned for one. Kathleen Sebelius has given exemptions from Obamacare to 500,000 union workers, McDonald's, so many groups, whole states have been exempted. Why not, just for political sake, grant it to the Catholic Church and these faith-based groups and be done with it?
I think it's driven by ideology. It's driven by an anti-life mentality that starts at the lowest basic levels of this administration, whether it's the HHS Secretary or the President himself. Yes, they talked about it, but they gave us a one-year exemption. As was talked about, well, maybe 1 year from now you'd be willing to turn over your conscience. But this is happening in the military, happening in other institutions. It's a full-out frontal attack on faith throughout society and government.
I want to show the viewers and you an exchange in the White House briefing room the other day. This is White House spokesman Jay Carney being interrogated on this very issue. Listen.
A Catholic Church. It was a pretty extraordinary situation on Sunday in parishes all across the country. Individual priests were reading letters from their bishops in that particular parish that were pretty much denouncing the Obama administration about these provisions dealing with contraception, Catholic hospitals and whatnot in connection with the Affordable Care Act. I guess my question would be, how does the administration justify having the federal government institute a law that basically forces people to violate their religious beliefs?
Well, that misrepresents actually what the decision about the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. Well, let me answer. The decision was made, as we have said in the past, and Secretary Sebelius has said, after very careful consideration, and the administration believes that this proposal strikes the appropriate balance between respecting religious beliefs and increasing access to important preventive services.
The bishops are saying just the opposite. They're saying that basically if somebody's working in a Catholic hospital and they don't cover contraception for their employees, that they're in violation of the federal law. So I don't understand how you're saying that there's still conscience protections. They would violate the law, wouldn't they?
Well, this is not direct an individual to do anything, first of all. We believe that the proposal strikes the appropriate balance between religious beliefs on the one hand and the need to increase access to important preventive services for women.
Last thing on this, E.J. Dionne, though, I mean, a lot of Republicans have attacked it, but a Democrat who's Catholic, E.J. Dionne, wrote in the Washington Post yesterday that the president, in his words, utterly botched this policy, and he said he, quote, threw his progressive Catholic allies under the bus. So despite everything you just read,
well, so
you have Democratic Catholics saying that that's not true.
That there are people who disagree. Well, Ed, all you're pointed out is that there are people who disagree with the decision. We understand that not everyone agrees with it, and that the necessity to provide access to preventive services for women was an important consideration.
What about the constitutional right to freedom of religion? Is that still?
I don't believe there are any constitutional rights issues here.
If I could follow up on
that. Let me move around here.
The Bishop of Phoenix said Catholics shouldn't comply with this law. Would there be any consequences for not?
I'm the wrong guy to ask.
So, I mean, it seems from that, saying that the necessity to provide access to preventive services for women was an important consideration. It wasn't important, it was the only consideration, it seems.
Well, the First Amendment wasn't a consideration either. That's one of our basic freedoms as Americans. As the Pope said, the most basic American freedom is freedom of religion. It comes first. And now we're asking at the door of our hospitals, at the door of our universities, that at the branches of our military that we're supposed to check our conscience at the door.
Yeah.
Conscience protections are fundamental to our American system of government, and it's frightening, this assault on people of faith that we see coming out of these types of rulings.
Now, the bishops have been encouraging people to write their congressmen. They want legislation passed. There are several bills before the Congress. Congressman Fortenberry's put one in the House. Marco Rubio just submitted one in the Senate. What are the possibilities, first of all, of it passing in the House and Senate? I'll start there.
I think it's very possible. Sooner rather than later, that's what our leadership said today about passing something.
In the House.
In the House. The problem is the Senate, and the problem is the
Harry
President.
Reid doesn't have to bring it up.
And the President can simply veto what his Secretary of HHS did. And so I think it's a very high level of concern. The only way I think you get to this President, it becomes a political issue, and that he's afraid of losing his election over this. But you think, why would he do this? Why
in an election year,
Why wouldn't he wait another year to take away our conscience protections? And indeed, they're proceeding ahead. We see that in other agencies as well.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk for a moment about a new bill you've submitted. It's called the Military Religious Freedom Protection Act. First of all, what does it do, and why?
Well, with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which, and you roll back, look at the history of that, we began receiving complaints, particularly from chaplains, about the inability of them to speak up against homosexual behavior anymore, whatever their faith tradition might be. And we hear from service members as well. What this would do is protect the conscience of folks that serve in the military. You shouldn't check your conscience at the door when you sign up for the military, whether you're a chaplain, whether you're a service member. In addition, we shouldn't be using military facilities for so-called homosexual marriages, because that's against our federal law.
But when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was lifted, it did allow gay couples access to those facilities on base, right?
Well, not for so-called marriages, according to current policy of DOD. Okay. But that could change with the stroke of a pen. That can change as well. But what I'm hearing is from chaplains that are getting calls from their superiors, or getting complaints that they actually read Scripture and find out the teaching about homosexual behavior. And so we're having sermons changed. We're having complaints being directed upon military members because of their personal beliefs about homosexual behavior.
Now, gay rights groups say, look, there's no chaplain being asked to perform gay marriages. Why do you need a bill like this?
Why would they be opposed? If that's the policy, let's codify it in law and make sure someone couldn't change that tomorrow. It's pretty simple. Obviously, what we're hearing complaints from chaplains, we're hearing complaints from military members. I had an uncle that served many, many years, still a military chaplain at age 90 years old, and not that he's complaining. But this is something personal to me, but it's something personal that should be to all Americans. Whether or not you agree with the Catholic Church, that should be a fundamental right of conscience, whether you're in the military.
So you see this as a freedom of religion issue. Again, it's freedom to practice and exercise your religion.
It certainly is, and we shouldn't have to turn over to government what we're believing as Catholics or any other faith.
But again, we're not talking about law, we're talking about regulations being written in the executive branch, which is something I don't think people quite understand. The breathtaking discretion left to the Health and Human Services Secretary in the case of Ms. Sebelius when that health care plan went through. I remember reading it and going, why would anyone vote for this? We simply don't know. The shape of it it's gelatinous when it was signed into law. Now it's taking shape and people are aghast. I wasn't particularly shocked by any of that. Are you?
No, I'm not. And there's over 1,000 references in the bill. The Secretary may, the Secretary shall.
Right.
And in a system where it's based on accountability, who do you hold accountable? The folks that voted for the law or passed the regulations, or they changed the law? Or we talk about waivers to Obamacare. Over 1,700 groups, states, or companies or labor unions get waivers. What about the rest of us? That's fundamentally un-American to have that type of unaccountable system.
Well, I don't know what could be more important than care for children and the frail elderly. I mean, at the end of life and the beginning of life, that's when you really need health care anyway. Why would we begin to allow the government to intrude into such intimate and far-reaching parts of our lives? It defies explanation.
Well, it does. And when we look at the fact we have 7,000 schools that are Catholic in this country, we have 600 hospitals, we have 200 Catholic colleges and universities, and having us to choose between our faith and servicing our society, that is a very dangerous situation.
But isn't the end game here, or it may seem the end game here is, they want to see what happened to that California healthcare cooperative where they cut away their Catholic identity and went entirely secular for the sake of growing and progressing as a group. Is that what we're seeing, the end of Catholic healthcare, the end of Catholic social outreach, the end of Catholic charities, the end of Catholic schools?
If this was fully implemented, that I believe would be the end result. And there are folks in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere that would love to eliminate any role for faith in our society. That's how secularized we've come in this nation.
The churches have already gotten out of the orphanage business. Catholic orphanages were such a part of finding children loving homes. That's gone in some major cities. They simply closed up shop because they couldn't comply with these regulations. And it seems, didn't they see the handwriting on the wall with this health care bill in these other areas of the government?
Well, I think they have, and that was by design, I do believe. And these rulings didn't surprise me. They might have surprised other folks. But again, there will be even more coming in the future. Right now, we're being, the President told us, executive order, we're not going to fund abortions. Most directly, the killing of the innocent. I'll let you know, we are funding them. You and I are, with our tax dollars, are funding them today. We've been doing that for years.
In what way?
In what way? In our Medicaid system. We're already paying for abortions. We've been doing that for years and years. And that's going to continue, and it's going to accelerate under Obamacare and many of the other provisions that are yet to be written on the regulatory side.
Amazing. Let's talk for a moment. You have a bill called the Prenatal Non-Discrimination Act. What does that mean?
Well, there's a number of things going on, other leaders on this issue. But it's an issue of making certain that the unborn have a right to life and protecting them. And, if they're diagnosed with a disease or malady, that, it's really a shame that in our society with the health care we provide, that we're selecting certain folks for death based on what we know about them. And that's discrimination against our unborn.
Yeah. And you have 4 adopted children yourself, so
yes,
this is a very personal issue.
Yes, and orphanages are very personal as well. I have two daughters from the country of Haiti that were in orphanages, wow. And and you mentioned something. They were run by Catholic folks,
really,
and that one was in Mother Teresa's orphanage. So that means a lot to us because as people of faith, whether it's in Haiti or particularly in America, we were found as people of faith. Our most basic freedom in America is the freedom of religion, and we should be protecting the conscience rights of all Americans, particularly Catholics in this day and age.
Some CBO numbers came out. The Congressional Budget Office, they often issue projections for the upcoming year. They do that every so often at the behest of members of Congress. They're projecting a $1 trillion deficit once again, the 4th year in a row. How can this government continue to run at this level of exorbitant spending with funds you simply don't have? It's
unsustainable. It's shocking, and it's going on for 4 straight years. We used to talk about $100 billion is being out of control.
Right.
Now we're at $1 trillion. It's going to be about $5 trillion of new debt under this president. It's unsustainable. And what we heard from the CBO today, he recognizes it's unsustainable. Our medical system's unsustainable. Many of these things will collapse. When it will happen, no one seems to know. But the point is, it is unsustainable. And then the CBO director, Congressional Budget Office, admitted today the real unemployment rate today is 10%.
Even though it's 8 on the paper.
Even it's being reported because 1.3% of the folks that quit looking for work. It's a pretty challenging situation.
Now, you're on the Budget Committee. Why is this such a struggle every year? I mean, realizing the cataclysm being faced, and I know Paul Ryan is the chairman of your budget who faced scorn when he dared to suggest cutting back some of these entitlement programs. Is that what is going to have to be cut if you're going to rein in this spending?
Well, if you look at the situation in Greece or Italy and numerous other countries, that's what has to happen because of our culture of death. We don't have a lot of new folks coming in to replace the retarees. We have 10,000 retirees every day, and there's no money to pay for those. So eventually, that becomes the question. Can we sustain a Medicare system? We cannot. Can we sustain a Social Security? If we make changes now, we can make certain they survive into the future. If not, if we ignore them, they are unsustainable.
How do you politically do that, particularly now when you have in the air this Occupy mentality where, it's the haves versus the have-nots, and it's the very rich oppressing the large majority of Americans here, and they need their benefits, they need their entitlement. Indeed, you even have bishops saying, whatever you do, you cannot cut these services, these funds for the poor. And the poor is a subjective term, but how do you deal with that?
I think one word, truth. what I found out, when you talk to American people and say, here's the truth. The truth is we can't borrow $1 trillion a year forever. Truth is we can't run a deficit forever. We have to balance the budget sometime, just like they do in their families and their businesses. When I tell folks, they say, hey, what do we need to do? Because too many people in Washington, D.C. and our nation's capital, they're worried about the next election. Every American I talk to, they're worried about the next generation. Because we have a real chance here that the next generation is going to be worse off than ours. And when you shoot straight with the American people, they're ready and willing to say, hey, we need to make changes.
What would you do? What policies would you put in place to restrain this spending and invigorate this economy that seems to be, according to the CBO, very slow economic growth projected for the next year?
There are many things. We have a regulatory environment that's killing job creators. Also, but we need to look at Medicare changes. In the Paul Ryan budget we passed through the House to help put that together, we need to introduce more competition and choice, not more bureaucrats in the medical world. And that's where we have the biggest growth, is on the Medicare side. We have to do something to change the system because it will collapse under its own weight, just like it has in Greece, Italy, Portugal, and numerous other countries that had the same aging problem and didn't have the proper preparation for that.
You would extend those tax cuts that the House passed several years ago, the so-called Bush tax cuts?
Absolutely. I think that's necessary. The last thing we need is a tax increase. What we need to do is put millions of Americans back to work.
Now, the President says, and even some of our viewers will send emails saying, shouldn't the rich pay their fair share? Yeah. Why not allow that rate to go up on those upper income earners?
Yeah. When I ask Kansans what's the top rate people should pay, they usually say, well, about 25%. The top rate is much higher than that. We have folks paying 30 to 40%. Actually, the top 1% of all Americans, not their rate, but the total they pay is 37% of the entire federal income tax. How more progressive can you get? What we need to do is actually flatten and fix the tax code. We can do that by getting rid of all the loopholes, tax credits.
Is that a possibility, a flat tax? Is it
I think it is.
Just pie in the sky, or I mean, Newt Gingrich is the only one.
If the American people get their way, they will get their way, and they will say, yes, we need a flattened. We could do a fair tax. We could do a flat tax. But the point being is, we are non-competitive as a nation. We make it very difficult to do business here, and in the past, that has been our advantage, letting entrepreneurs flourish in America. And right now, we're punishing them. And you know, the president, a year and a half ago, he signed those tax cuts and extended them. But as we get an election year, he's talking about, well, maybe we don't need them anymore. But the point is, when you're talking about the type of uncertainty that would occur at the end of this year, a $5 trillion tax increase unless we change something, that's what's driving a lot of the fear and the lack of investment by business.
Last question. Do you see heavy austerity coming here like we're seeing in Europe?
It certainly could happen. But given we know what the problem is now. If we move now, we can avoid some of those problems by gradually making changes in the system. But if you don't, you see what happens in Greece. They have to make those changes overnight. Yeah. And I'll tell you, there's no one to bail out America. We can bail out Greece, but no one's here to bail us out. And the Chinese expect to be paid their $1.3 trillion they've loaned us. And there will be a point in time in the future where they'll say, no more borrowing until you make those changes.
Congressman Tim Huelskamp,
hey,
thanks so much for being here. You can follow the Congressman's work in Congress and learn more about all this legislation we talked about tonight at his website. He's at Huelskamp, HUELSKAMP.house.gov. When we return, Dr. Walid Faraj joins us to talk about religious persecution in the Middle East, honor killings in North America, and global jihad. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.